welcome in The Hague.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here, even if it's just remote.
Yeah, well, we're curious about your presentation. You are one of the founders of the Center of the Study of Political Graphics. So you have a long history of collecting images from around the world on all sorts of movements, political movements, protests. We know you have a very interesting collection from which you make exhibitions also. So maybe, well, this is also sort of an exhibition this way, I think. So let's get over to you and see what you have selected for us.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. I started collecting posters. Actually, I collected my first poster, co-curated my first exhibition, and gave my first talk on posters and poster art and politics in 1981. So I've done a few, and this one was actually interesting because when I was asked by your organization to really focus on analog, and I looked over the past exhibitions, and while there were always silk screens and woodcuts and stencils incorporated, the majority of most exhibitions, not all, there were some that were all silk screens, but the majority of most exhibitions were offset. And so in researching for this, I came up with the 6 art collectives that I'm going to be talking about now, all of whom use analog. Of course, digital didn't exist during the first ones. It's only something quite recent. But they all were formed during times of crises, times of war. And they all also were for most of them were very international. And they had people from all over the world working with them. And their posters, as I will show you, also traveled all over the world and influenced other artists and other collectives. So let me just start with, okay. So the first one is the Taller de Gráfica Popular, which was founded in Mexico by a group of left artists in 1937. And their purpose was to make art about social, to advance the revolutionary struggle, to advance social change. And what was going on, obviously, in the world was preparing for war. You had, the Nazis had taken over Germany. The Spanish Civil War had started a year earlier. A lot of people were leaving Spain who could leave Spain, were coming to Mexico. So they had very firsthand experience with what was going on with the fascists and Franco in Spain. And so they started this art collective. And the first piece I'm showing you was from 1945. And it was fascinating to me because in June of 45, the Allies were obviously winning. You can see the big bombs in the background, one with the US flag, one with the hammer and sickle of the Soviet Union, and the right is the bomb is the Union Jack of Great Britain. And it was obvious that at that point that the Allies were going to win, but they didn't know what date the actual victory was going to take place, when Berlin was going to be occupied. So they put out this poster with 2-color lino cut telling we're going to have a big demonstration when Berlin is occupied by the Allies, but we don't know when. So if we know in Mexico before noon, we will meet 5 o'clock that day in front of the Federal Building in the Plaza of the Constitution. But if we don't know till after 5 o'clock, we will meet the following day. Until afternoon, we will meet the following day at 5 o'clock at the same place. In the United States, I don't know if you do this in Europe, but in the United States, we have, when we know something is going to happen, like in the 90s when George Bush the first gave an ultimatum to Saddam Hussein, unless you pull out of Kuwait by such a date, we're going to start bombing on such a date. So we didn't know exactly when the bombing was going to happen, but obviously it was going to. So we sent out a similar kind of notice. if the bombing starts before noon, let's meet at the Federal Building at 5, and the bombing starts after that, let's meet the next day at 5. So we were preparing for this big demo. Usually you don't have that kind of something is ongoing and you make a demonstration to protest something that's ongoing. But this was something we really wanted to protest in a much earlier, quicker manner. And they were doing, who knows, probably we got the idea from this kind of poster. 1947, workers' rights, May Day, and it's basically only a workers' movement that is conscious, united, and honest can successfully defend the interests of the workers and help the aggrandizement of Mexico. This is one of my favorites. It's just a powerful, powerful poster. This is a very interesting poster. You'll see this repeated throughout the presentation. It was first done by 1954 by, all of these are done by TGP, that's their initials, Taller Gráfica Popular, Adolfo Meshiak. And in 1954, there were two really pivotal events that happened. One was the death of Frida Kahlo, and when she died, the government said absolutely nothing to honor her, nothing to show the hammer and sickle, nothing to, promote communism. This was a time of a lot of anti-communism, which was being promoted by the United States. The Cold War was really escalating. And then the other thing that happened, like a month later, was the U.S. invaded Guatemala, overthrowing the democratically elected Jacobo Arbenz. So these two things, both of which had the U.S. stamp on it, we're repressing freedom of speech. And so he did this indigenous youth with a chain across his mouth, and I don't know how well you can see it, but okay, it says "Made in USA" right there, and it's called freedom of expression. They also dealt with a lot of international issues. This is one that they did in Francisco Mora did in 1953, when Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were about to be executed. And there was that in the United States, this was a period, the United States has never been free of racism and anti-Semitism and repression, and in spite of the reputation that the government would like to have. And they were literally trying to make, because of anti-communism and anti-Semitism, they were trying to make an example of these two Jews, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, to get them to confess to giving nuclear bomb weapon secrets to the Soviets. And so this was an international attempt to stop the execution. There were Free Rosenberg posters made in many countries. The French, I think Soviets. I know there's a lot of international posters about this issue. It was not a successful campaign. This is one done after they were executed. And this one says, "We will not forget Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, assassinated by the government of war of the United States because they loved and believed in peace." Very different image from the prior one, which is the monster hand of capital being stopped by the powerful hands of the worker. And here there's just a very, very beautifully drawn lino cut, also portraits of them. And this one's by Angel Braco. One of the ideas behind the TGP was that all art should be done collectively. It was really inspired by the mural movement, which you can't paint those murals by yourself. You have a lot of people helping and working with you. And so this was a collective piece by two major artists, Elizabeth Catlett, who was from the United States. She was one of the more prominent African-American artists that left the United States with her husband, Charles White, who was also an extraordinary and quite well-known, very well-known artist. And a lot of it was because of the racism and the anti-communism in this country during the 50s. But she worked with it on this. She did the drawing. And the lino cut was done by Alberto Beltran. either of them were perfectly skilled at doing lino cuts and totally skilled at making gorgeous drawings. But because of the collaborative intentionality in the formation of the TGP, they actually did this one together, and it's quite huge. You can kind of see it. It's actually in two parts. It's two pieces. You can see that in the middle here, there's like a gray line. So that's one piece of paper, and then the second piece of paper was stitched. So these really would have been intended for, and it's on cheap newsprint, so held wheat paste very well, and stop the war. And this one was, part of it anyway, was redone in the 90s by a Los Angeles artist. It's a silkscreen named Mark Valen. And the image of the hand stopping the bayonets is actually, we've seen it in Canadian posters. We've seen it in quite a number of posters, but it's, again, fascinating how a poster from this Mexican group in this case, the 50s, has become an internationally known and used image. The next group is the Atelier Populaire, also known, as part of the May 1968 French student movement, French student worker movement in Paris. And most of the posters I'm showing you are from the collection of the Center for the Study of Political Graphics. But there are a few things that I've taken from the internet. These, I just found these actually a couple of days ago. Most of them were taken by Philippe Vermes, who's one of the few photographers that the students let in because they were very worried about police infiltration, which was a big worry. But I think there was just some fascinating views of them actually doing the posters. This one's definitely by Vermeer. And you can see, I mean, they have no idea how many were really made. They were just producing them. So this first one is kind of one of the iconic ones of the police with the baton. They didn't use guns like the United States tends to use against demonstrators, but they bashed a lot of people's heads in. And the helmet that they used, it was very iconic. There was a kind of like a ridge, and you see that ridge in a number of the posters. These are all from all silk screens from Paris 68. This is, and you can see the ridge on this one, and I'm pointing out that for a specific reason, but this is a very distorted, monstrous looking police. And it says, the English translation will be, the police are occupying the art school. The art school is occupying the streets. This is a factory with the fist coming out of the chimney. The struggle continues, la lucha continua. And this is a common expression in many posters all over the world. This is one of the other themes that students were portraying was solidarity with workers, solidarity with immigrants. And this one, in this case, it's showing the black and white. There's a lot of immigrants from Africa, and they were very discriminated against. So it's French workers, immigrant united, workers united. It's another one of the more well-known ones. It's part of many of them were against capitalism, against imperialism, against the Vietnam War, which France was a French colony before the United States got involved. Excuse me. I participate, you participate, he participates, we participate, we all participate, but they profit. And you see the stamp on the bottom has been on a lot of these posters. It's the stamp of the Atelier Populaire, and they basically took over the art school, the École des Beaux-Arts, which it says on the bottom. And this is the last one for this series, and it's showing that de Gaulle was really, no different than Hitler. It was just a mask, and it's kind of blurry, but the armband, which traditionally would have been the swastika, in this case is the Cross of Lorraine. I think I have another poster later that has it a little bit clearer, but the Cross of Lorraine was the sign of Free France during World War II. So it was a sign of the liberation. And here it's being shown as instead a symbol of oppression. The next group is, there were really many groups all over the United States that formed spontaneously in 1970. What happened in 1970 was that President Nixon was elected because he promised to stop the Vietnam War. Well, he lied. We all know he lied. But he was even worse than that. He was secretly bombing the neutral country of Cambodia, and nobody in this, Cambodians obviously knew about it, but the United States taxpayer didn't. And then he sent troops in without congressional approval. And this really, there were protests all over the country. At one of the protests, which had been going on for a number of days, peaceful protest at Kent State University in Ohio, the National Guard was called in. They started shooting. They killed 4 students and injured a number. And then a few days later, there was a riot in Atlanta, Georgia, where a 16-year-old mentally challenged Black youth was beaten and killed in jail, and people wanted answers and they weren't getting. So things started exploding, and the police again shot and killed 6. And then a few days after that, in Jackson State College, there was another demonstration, police shot, killing 2 unarmed African-American students. So it was, demonstrations took place across the country. There were more than 4 million students involved, closing over 450 colleges. It was, and this is one of the posters. So in Berkeley, so I'm just focusing on one of the groups at Berkeley. And when people talk about University of California, Berkeley, they talk about it as if it was a left school. The school was not left. The university was very right-wing, a lot of military industrial contracts. A lot of the school money came from advising and being a think tank for the war machine. It was the students that were radicals, not the university. So, which is probably the same case in the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris and most places. And you can actually date when this poster was made, because it's referring to both Kent State and Augusta, Georgia, but it's no reference yet to Jackson State because that hadn't happened yet. And you also notice, if you notice all the black dots on the sides, they were using they were recycling computer paper. The dot matrix was what the computers were being used. They were literally meters and meters of this piles of used computer paper. And if you look, you can actually sometimes, if you look over here, you can see some of the writing on the other side, because they were all typed or dot matrix on the other side. So that's what they used. It was cheap, it was free, it was available. And they're very fragile, because this is actually there's a perforation right in the middle. And we're lucky to have so many of them still in one piece. It's the real thing, using the Coca-Cola, the very iconic Coca-Cola bottle and the Coca-Cola script, but now it's calling napalm. It's the real thing for Southeast Asia. And for those of you who don't remember or don't know, napalm was a soapy, sticky substance that it burned in, humongous heat. And if you jumped in a river, it spread. It didn't wash off, it spread. So it was a extremely horrible, torturous form of war weaponry. This was done. Most of these we don't know who did them. They were doing them very quickly, very anonymously. Years after this was done, I actually met the artist, and this is the only poster he ever made in his life. And it's an amazing one. It's using the Goya, the famous Goya 19th century of Saturn devouring his children, but now it's America with the German spelling using the K making a reference to Nazis. I guess I can't move this thing here, so I just will leave it alone. America is devouring its children. And unfortunately, this one does not go out of style. Many of these posters do not go out of style. They continue to be used, and they continue to be relevant. And this is still happening now. This is an interesting one because it's a US students doing it, but they're using the image of the police from Paris 68. So that's what that ridge in the helmet that I was referring to earlier, the US cops don't have that kind of a ridge, but the Parisian ones did. But they changed it because the Black Panthers started really using pig faces for the cops, and that they started doing that in the mid 60s. And so here they've kind of combined the Panther pig police faces with the Paris 68 helmets. The one on the left is from Paris 68, fascist vermin. And the one on the right is Berkeley 1970. So you can see, I can't move this thing for some reason. It's not letting me move it. Oh, there it is. Sorry, now you can see it better. And you can see the rats very similar. The title, fascist infested, is also very similar. So you can see how the Paris 68 movement and posters were very influential in the United States. But it's also circular because when they were first, the Parisian students were first wanting to make posters, somebody suggested that they use, instead of hand painting all these things, they use the same technique that the American students were using in their protests, which was the silkscreen. So there's the movements keep each other in great ideas. And here's that one here the Cross of Lorraine is easier to see. But now the one on the right was done in Berkeley in 1970, but instead of taking de Gaulle taking the mask off, it is Nixon taking the mask off. And instead of the Cross of Lorraine, you've got the swastika. So the next a movement, the Minjung peoples, which stand for people. Minjung means people. The Minjung art movement was founded in South Korea after the Gwangju massacre of 1980. The uprising was started when they'd had a series of military dictatorships, and then there was just one more coup that happened in May of 1980 when another military dictator took power and implemented martial law. And people, mainly students and workers. So I think the French and the South Korean movement were one of the few times that the students were really collaborating with the workers. In the United States, historically, now it's changing. Now it's clearly changing. But I know during the Vietnam War, the labor movement was supporting the war. They were making a lot of money. And so they were actually against the student protesters. But this was, like as in Paris 68, clearly they were working together. Nearly 250,000 people participated. Estimated up over 2,000 were killed. And this gave rise to the Minjung, the people's movement. One of the things that happened during the investigations was the students they'd been living under dictatorships for many years, and they idolized the United States. They believed the US propaganda that the US sends out about itself. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, democracy. The students believed that. But during the investigations behind the uprising and the massacre, it turned out that the United States knew about the plan to shoot everybody and approved it, that the United States was involved in the suppression of the movement from the beginning. And this is what turned the students against the United States. And they started looking for other ways of cultural expression because US art was really, and US defined cultural practices were very prominent in Korea. And so they came up with they wanted to do something different. Especially abstract expressionism was a tool of the United States during the Cold War. There's lots of stuff written on it. It's quite fascinating, hard to believe, but very fascinating. And so, although ironically, there's obviously a European tradition in the German expressionist woodcut, but so this is what the students started to do. They were inexpensive. They were easy to understand. That was another thing about abstract art that was big in the rest of the world at this time, was that it was, unless you were a student or an academic, it was really hard to understand. And they wanted things that people could really understand right away without interpretation. These are several that are by an artist named Hong Song-dam, who was raised in Gwangju. This one is showing preparation. You see them making banners below, hanging banners here, and just kind of gathering guns. The students and the workers broke into several police stations. They armed themselves. So they're all showing some of that. This is another one where they're piling rocks. You see the line of police over here, burning cars. And basically, they're taking this into the middle of the city. And here's another one where it's actually quite celebratory with guns. I don't know if she's handing out weapons or she's handing out food. I haven't figured that one out yet. But all of these are done by Hong Song-dam this one's done by in 1988. So it's throughout the 80s they were doing these. This one is a martyr. His name was Yoon Sang-won, one of the almost more than 2,000 people that were killed. And this is I don't know who did this one, but this one's called The Puppet Show. And this one, now you see the influence of the awareness of the US being involved in the massacre. So it's a monstrous hand painted in the US flag that was controlling the dictator in the dictatorship in South Korea. This one's called Hidden Faces Unmasked, Han Song-dam. And again, you see the images of death and the military with the US flag behind it, and the stripes are at first I thought there were guns, but because I've seen many with that, but that's not so clear in this one. And this is just one other one showing other issues that they dealt with. This one showing a sweatshop. So again, it's just the total cramped, the stitching and the steaming and the working conditions that obviously the sweatshops are something that exist all over the world, and we keep finding them in the United States as well, even though they're supposedly illegal. I want to say something about the posters in general that I omitted in the beginning. The posters really have multiple functions. These graphics have multiple functions. The first function is to educate people what's going on, to mobilize people for action, to get them to be aware and to become involved, to become inspired. But after the events are over, like all of these events are, obviously sweatshops still exist, but the specific circumstances that, South Korea is now nominally anyway, a democracy, so that the movement has changed. But the purpose of these posters then continues, but now it's to let new generations know what happened, what was going on, how we fought, and we won. And the people who own history is owned by those who write the books. History is run by the victors, and these posters are obviously by the people who are not all the time, most of the time, they're certainly not in power. They're certainly not, the story of their victories is not told. And these posters do record that. So they really have one function when they're made, and then another function is just as important after the issues are no longer making headlines. The May Do Art Ensemble, this is the one group that we actually have nothing of in our archive. We have posters from everything I've shown you so far, but not this one. But fortunately, there are a number of books and archives around that have them. This was started in South Africa after the Soweto uprising in 1976, when estimated 20,000 students were peacefully protesting against the Bantu education, which was to teach Afrikaans, not English, in the schools. And Afrikaans was the language of the white minority. And it was basically, if you were a Black African and you only spoke if you were speaking Bantu and Afrikaans as opposed to English, you could not get a better job. You could not, you basically were kept in a position of servitude and in South Africa. And so they were demonstrating they wanted to be taught English in schools, and the thousands of police were called, and they killed officially 176, if you believe what the government said. Most people say it's closer to 700 were killed, mainly children, mainly students and a lot of children. So after this massacre took place, a lot of artists and cultural workers fled to Botswana, and they continued to work with their comrades in South Africa, and they created the Medu art ensemble. Medu means roots in one of the indigenous languages. And there were over 6, and this wasn't just a visual arts. This was theater, this was poetry, this was performers and music. So it was and you see them smashing the Bantu education. This particular poster was done by Albio Gonzalez, who was a Cuban. This also had an international, mainly South Africans, but they were Cubans, Canadians, US, people from the United States, people from Sweden. So it also had that internationalist quality.
Caroll?
Yes.
Here we are running a little bit out of time, so maybe may I ask you to make some choices on what you can show?
Okay, then let me run down to, okay, let me just, how much time do I have? And I will figure it out from there.
5 minutes.
Okay, so I'm just gonna go one last of this one. Again, a para 68 on the left, and a Medu cultural, Medu art ensemble art on the right. So you can see, again, para 68 was extremely important. The last collective is the main collective was the ASARO, the Revolutionary Assembly of Artists from Oaxaca. In 2006, there was a teacher strike demanding better pay, better conditions. This had been going on for 25 years. Every fall, there was this teacher strike, and it was just kind of a normal thing. But this year, in 2006, the governor of Oaxaca sent troops against them and were very, very violent. And so community organizations formed, arts organizations formed. APO was an umbrella for over 300 community organizations. ASARO was supposed to be an umbrella for the arts organizations. Some did join, some maintained independence, such as La Pistola, which is a combination of lapis for pencil and pistol for gun, and Arte Jaguar. And I'm just going to show you, and these are huge. So these are mainly stencil and woodcut. So these are like this one's over, over a meter. Famous photo of Zapata, but now with a gas mask. These are all put on the walls. This is a woodcut of women from a village in their traditional red huipiles. They're, taking to the streets. This one is like over 2 meters high. That is duct tape. That's silver duct tape. They did these on paper so they could be transported out into other countries, but these were actually put on the walls, and And the army would come in during the day and whitewash the walls. And then at night, the students and others, the artists, would come and re-stencil the walls again. So this was constantly going back and forth between, that's the portrait of Ruiz, of the governor. And in bullfighting, there's expressions like, we have them in English. Taking the bull by the horns means dealing with the issue. And then there's one for evading the issue. And that's what the Ruiz is doing. He's evading and avoiding the problems. This one is extraordinary. This is a small version, but it's 10 feet. So it's you can figure that out. It's 10 feet by 3 feet. But it's using three analog techniques. The background is a silkscreen wallpaper of Zapata. The figures are stencils. And then the trajectory of the Molotov cocktail is spray paint. But this is a small version. It's only 10 feet wide. This was actually a life-size version where these figures are the size of real people that were on the sides of the buildings. And so they did that obviously with slides and projections, and they were using non-analog methods to create the stencils, but then the stencils themselves are analog. And I just want to talk this real fast. This one is using a quote by Che Guevara: the true revolutionary is guided by great sentiments of love. And the image is from this 1830s Liberty Leading the People by Delacroix. And it's very hard this is very hierarchical, leader, pyramid form. But notice the student on the right, to the right of liberty. The movement in Oaxaca was non-hierarchical. It was what they call horizontalidad, horizontal leadership. It was literally across the board. And they've taken the guns out of the student hand in the 19th century piece, replaced it with a fist. We have 2 students now, and you can barely see it, but in his hand is a slingshot, which was the weapons that the Oaxacans used. They did not use guns against the military. This is a wall stencil about freeing political prisoners. These 3 faces were from 2006, were taken from this 1976 poster by Juan Fuentes from Berkeley. So how these posters, this was not a widely distributed poster, but the artists are studying each other's work. So you can see these 2 are these 2, and this woman here is this here. And he got them from 3 different sources. And he says, there's no way that these 3 faces could have come from any place else but his poster. So again, the internationality. This one is a little cruder than what I've been showing you, but it says, we Oaxacans don't forget, because they're making reference here to Mexico 68, when they had, massacre again in the protests of the Olympics. And here, so just a couple of things. The logo is a reference to the Olympic logo. The face in the gorilla, this was the president of Mexico in 68. This is the face of the governor of Oaxaca in 2006. This was reissued by Meshiak for the Mexico 1968 protests. And this was taken just this year at a protest in Los Angeles, protesting the genocide ongoing in Gaza. So that poster continues to have relevance and power. And I just want to stop with this one, another one from the Quanju massacre. I'm probably older than most of you, and I was in the fight for struggle, in the struggle for justice, and the artists that are doing this extraordinary struggle. We have to remember to celebrate our victories, take care of each other. As Emma Goldman said, if I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution. And I thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Caroll. It was very interesting to see all these this landscape of different visual languages around the world, how they influence each other, but also how separate they are. I have one question. can you say something about how imagery is being used differently in different parts of the world? Is there something you can have some insight about? You've seen a lot.
It's interesting you ask how it's used differently, and or I've been trying to see how it's used similarly.
Mhm.
I don't really know. I don't really know if I can answer that question, because I mean, a lot of people say, well, why do we even need paper, in the internet age? And with all the protests going on now all over the world, you can't carry your computer monitor in a demonstration. You can't stick your computer monitor on the wall. You can't, you need to have the paper to be able to carry around to post. The other thing is, one difference is I was focusing on making these posters during time of war. In the United States, we can do offset because it hasn't had lately certainly, it hasn't had the level of repression that they would have had in South Africa, where they would have been killed, in South Korea, where they would have been killed, in El Salvador during their civil war, where if you got caught doing an offset, unless you were doing it in Mexico or Cuba, if you got caught in El Salvador doing an offset, you could get killed. And the analog is much easier, it's much more private. It's much more much more clandestine. It's much safer. You don't need huge equipment. You don't need a print shop, somebody's gonna squeal.
Yeah, paper
So
will.
that would be a significant difference. Is the level of danger you are in to make the posters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your talk. This is also the last talk in our symposium, so we have to put an end to it. But it is being recorded. Yeah, I saw you asked for it. It is being recorded, so you can look back at the previous speakers also later on, I hope. So, but thank you.
And if anybody, and we're always looking for posters. So if you have some,
yes,
collect for us, we would appreciate it.
Well, I already understood. Yes, there's a big donation coming up from the Gerpse Werkplaats, the print studio here, who are collecting posters from
Wonderful. Here. And thank you all for doing this work.
Thank you.